High Counselor Valthor sat in the great chamber of the Galactic Council, his long fingers steepled before him, his eyes fixed on the view screen that showed the stars beyond. He had served the Council for 300 cycles. He had seen species rise and fall, empires crumble and reform, wars begin and end. He believed he had seen everything. He believed he understood the way of things. The strong ruled. The weak served. That was the order. That was the law. Humanity did not understand that law. They had been part of the Council for only 70 years, a young species from a small, unremarkable system. They had come eager, desperate to prove themselves, hungry for a place among the stars. The Council had given them one. The jobs no one else wanted. The dangerous trade routes. The neglected border worlds. The humans had accepted quietly. They had worked hard. They had not complained. But they had grown. They had spread across the galaxy, their colonies appearing on worlds the Council had thought empty. Their ships moved through trade lanes that the Council considered its own. Their diplomats, once quiet and deferential, had begun to speak with a voice that was not humble. They demanded equal representation. They demanded a seat at the table. They demanded to be seen as something more than servants. Valthor had watched this with growing irritation. The Council had been patient. They had allowed the humans their expansion, their trade, their ambitions. But patience had limits. When a human colony was established on a world the Council had claimed centuries ago, when human ships were found in restricted space, when human diplomats walked out of a Council session in protest, Valthor decided the time for patience was over. He called for a vote. The Council agreed. They issued an ultimatum. Humanity would withdraw from disputed territories. They would cede control of their trade routes to Council oversight. They would accept a permanent Council ambassador on Earth. These were the terms. There was no room for negotiation. The alternative was war. Valthor expected fear. He expected the humans to send desperate pleas, to offer compromises, to beg for mercy. That was what the weak did when the strong spoke. That was the order of things. He waited for the human response, already planning the celebration that would follow their submission. The response came within a day. It was brief. It was not what he expected. We will send a peace envoy to discuss your terms. Expect our arrival in 7 standard days. Valthor read the message twice. He looked for the fear, the desperation, the begging. He found none. The words were calm. They were simple. They were not the words of a species that was afraid. He dismissed his concerns. The humans were backing down, as he knew they would. They were sending a peace envoy, a delegation to negotiate the terms of their surrender. He imagined them arriving in a small shuttle, their heads bowed, their voices quiet, ready to accept whatever was offered. He would be gracious, he decided. He would allow them to keep some of their pride. It was the way of the strong to be merciful. He ordered the Council's finest ships to form an honor guard. They would greet the human delegation with a display of power that would remind them of their place. The ships assembled in the space above the Council world, their hulls gleaming, their weapons visible, their crews at attention. Valthor watched them from the Council chamber, pleased with the message they sent. The Council was strong. The Council was mighty. The Council would not be defied. The days passed. The Council waited. Representatives from a dozen species gathered in the great chamber, their faces curious, their voices low. They had heard about the ultimatum. They had heard about the human response. They had come to see the submission. They had come to see the weak bow to the strong. On the 7th day, the sensors detected a vessel dropping out of FTL at the edge of the system. Valthor leaned forward in his chair, his eyes fixed on the view screen. He expected a shuttle. Small, humble, unarmed. A ship that knew its place. What arrived was not a shuttle. The vessel that emerged from the darkness was like nothing Valthor had ever seen. It was massive, larger than any dreadnought in the Council fleet. Its hull was dark, angular, built from materials that did not appear on any known registry. It moved with a purpose that seemed almost alive, its engines burning with a light that outshone the nearby star. Weapons emplacements covered its surface, their barrels gleaming, their targeting systems active. It did not hide its purpose. It announced it. The Council chamber erupted. Representatives shouted over each other, their voices rising in panic. Some demanded the ship be destroyed. Others demanded explanations. Most simply stared at the view screen, their mouths open, their faces pale. Valthor sat in his chair, his hands gripping the armrests, his heart pounding in his chest. He had expected a shuttle. He had expected submission. He had expected the weak to bow. The humans had sent a warship. the largest warship any of them had ever seen. And as it moved toward the Council world, its weapons gleaming, its engines burning, Valthor understood for the first time that he had made a mistake. He had assumed the humans were weak because they did not fight. He had assumed they would submit because they had always submitted. He had assumed that the order of things could not be changed. He looked at the ship on his screen, at the message it carried, at the truth it represented. The humans were not sending a delegation to surrender. They were sending a message. And that message was written not in words, but in steel. The Council had demanded a peace envoy. Humanity had delivered something else. Something that would change everything. Something that would remind the galaxy that the weak could become strong. That the servants could become masters. That the order of things was not as unshakable as he had believed. The ship emerged from FTL like a wound being torn in the fabric of space. Valthor had seen many vessels in his long life. He had watched fleets assemble for war, had seen the might of 100 species displayed in formation. He had never seen anything like this. It was massive, larger than any dreadnought in the Council fleet. Its hull was dark, angular, built from materials that did not appear on any known registry. It moved with a purpose that seemed almost alive, its engines burning with a light that outshone the nearby star. Weapons emplacements covered its surface, their barrels gleaming, their targeting systems active. It did not hide its purpose. It announced it to the stars. The Council chamber erupted. Representatives from a dozen species, beings who had governed the galaxy for millennia, screamed and shouted over each other. Some demanded the ship be destroyed, calling for an immediate attack. Others demanded explanations, turning to Valthor as if he could make the vessel disappear. Most simply stared at the view screen, their mouths open, their faces pale, their hands shaking. They had never been afraid. They had forgotten what fear felt like. They were remembering now. Valthor forced himself to move. He called for silence, his voice cutting through the noise, barely. He ordered a channel opened to the human vessel. His hands were steady. His voice was steady. He would not show fear. He would not show weakness. He was a high counselor. He had faced threats before. He had faced enemies before. He would face this. The face that appeared on the screen was not what he expected. It was not a diplomat with soft words and a bowed head. It was a woman. Her hair was pulled back tight against her skull. Her uniform was crisp, dark, decorated with insignias he did not recognize. Her eyes were cold. Not angry. Not afraid. Cold. Like the space between stars. Like the hull of the ship behind her. She identified herself as Admiral Sarah Chen, commander of the UNS Indomitable. She stated, simply, that she had been sent as humanity's peace envoy. Valthor stared at her. He had prepared speeches. He had prepared demands, threats, warnings. He had prepared to look down on the humans who had come to beg. He had not prepared for this. This is not a peace envoy, he said. His voice came out harsher than he intended. This is a warship. You are threatening the Council. Admiral Chen's expression did not change. Her eyes did not blink. We were told to send a peace envoy, she said. We sent one. The Indomitable is the most powerful vessel humanity has ever built. She carries enough firepower to destroy your fleet. She is crewed by the finest soldiers humanity has ever produced. She is our peace envoy. She carries our message. She paused. Her voice grew harder, though Valthor had not thought it could. The Council demanded submission. We are here to tell you that humanity does not submit. We have spent centuries fighting among ourselves. We have learned war in ways you cannot imagine. We have built weapons that would make your scientists weep. And we have decided that we will never again bow to those who think themselves our masters. Valthor found his voice. You would start a war over this. Over a few disputed territories. Over trade routes. You would risk the lives of your people for pride. Admiral Chen shook her head slowly. Her eyes did not leave his. We do not want war. We want peace. But peace on our terms. Terms that do not require us to kneel. Terms that recognize humanity as an equal, not a subject. We are here to negotiate. But we are here with the strength to back our words. She leaned closer to the camera. Her face filled the screen, her eyes dark, her jaw set. The Council demanded a peace envoy. We delivered a message of steel. What you do with it is up to you. The screen went dark. Valthor sat in his chair, his hands gripping the armrests, his heart pounding in his chest. Around him, the Council chamber was silent. The representatives had stopped shouting. They were watching him, waiting. He could feel their fear, their uncertainty, their desperation. They had never faced anything like this. Neither had he. He looked at the view screen. The ship hung in the darkness, its hull dark, its weapons gleaming, its engines burning. It did not move. It did not fire. It simply waited. And in its waiting, it spoke a truth that Valthor had never wanted to hear. The humans were not weak. They had never been weak. They had been patient. They had been watching. They had been learning. And now they had come to claim what they believed was theirs. Valthor thought about the ultimatum he had sent, the demands he had made, the arrogance with which he had dismissed the humans as a junior species, a servant race, something to be used and discarded. He thought about the ships he had ordered to form an honor guard, a display of power meant to intimidate, to remind the humans of their place. He thought about the way he had laughed when the human response came, imagining their diplomats with bowed heads, their voices soft with fear. He looked at the ship on his screen. He looked at the weapons that could end his fleet, the hull that could not be pierced, the engines that burned like a star. He looked at the message it carried, the truth it spoke. The humans had not come to surrender. They had come to be seen. They had come to be heard. They had come to be respected. And they had come with the strength to demand it. He did not know what to do. He did not know if the Council could fight this ship, if they could win, if there was any way back from the edge they had reached. He only knew that the galaxy had changed. The order he had believed in, the order that had ruled for millennia, was crumbling. And in its place, a new power was rising. A power that had been forged in centuries of war, in generations of struggle, in the fires of a world that had nearly destroyed itself and emerged stronger. A power that would not kneel. A power that would not bow. A power that had delivered a message of steel, and was waiting for the Council to understand it. The Council did not know what to do. The indomitable hung in their space, a silent monument to humanity's resolve. It did not fire. It did not move. It simply waited. But its presence was a challenge, a threat, a promise. Valthor watched it from the Council chamber, his eyes fixed on the dark hull, the gleaming weapons, the engines that burned like a star. He had never felt so small. He had never felt so powerless. The Council's military advisors ran simulations. They calculated the ship's firepower, its defenses, its capabilities. The numbers were not good. The Indomitable outclassed anything in the Council fleet. Its weapons could penetrate their shields, its armor could withstand their attacks, its engines could outrun their fastest ships. They ran the simulations again, changing variables, adjusting strategies. The results did not change. The Indomitable could destroy their fleet before they could bring half their weapons to bear. They could not win. They could not even fight. Valthor called for an emergency session. The representatives gathered in the great chamber, their faces pale, their voices low. They had come to see the humans submit. They had come to watch the weak bow to the strong. Instead, they had found themselves staring into the face of something they did not understand. Something they could not control. The debate went on for hours. Some representatives called for an attack. They argued that the Council could not show weakness, that they had to demonstrate that threats would not be tolerated, that the humans must be punished for their arrogance. Others argued for negotiation. They pointed to the simulations, the numbers, the impossibility of victory. They said the Council had made a mistake, that they had underestimated humanity, that the only way out was to talk. Most representatives said nothing. They sat in their seats, their eyes on the view screen, their hands shaking. They were afraid. They had never been afraid. The Council had ruled for millennia, its power unchallenged, its authority absolute. They had forgotten what it felt like to face something they could not defeat. They were remembering now. Valthor listened to the arguments, the fear, the anger. He watched the representatives who wanted to fight, who wanted to show the humans that the Council could not be threatened. He watched the representatives who wanted to talk, who wanted to find a way out of the standoff. He watched the ones who sat in silence, their faces empty, their eyes fixed on the ship that waited in the darkness. He sent spies, probes, scouts. He needed to know what they were facing. He needed to know if there was a way out. The reports came back slowly, each one worse than the last. The Indomitable was not alone. Human ships were massing at the edge of the system, their signals encrypted, their movements coordinated. There were dozens of them, then hundreds, then more. They were not warships, not all of them. There were supply vessels, support ships, communications arrays. They were a fleet that had been waiting, watching, ready. Valthor understood. The humans had not come to surrender. They had come prepared. They had come with the strength to back their words, the resources to sustain a siege, the patience to wait the Council out. They had come to show what they were capable of. They had come to demonstrate that they would not be pushed, bullied, or intimidated. They had come to force the council to see them as equals. And they were prepared to fight if they must. He sat in his office, alone, the reports spread before him, the image of the indomitable on his screen. He thought about the ultimatum he had sent, the demands he had made, the arrogance with which he had dismissed humanity. He had called them a junior species, a servant race, something to be used and discarded. He had laughed when they said they would send a peace envoy, imagining their diplomats with bowed heads, their voices soft with fear. He had been wrong. He had been so wrong. He sent a private message to Admiral Chen. His hands were steady. His voice was steady. He would not show fear. He had shown enough. "What do you want?" he asked. Her answer came quickly. Her voice was calm, measured, as if she had been waiting for this question, as if she had known it would come. "A seat on the council," she said. "Equal representation for humanity. The right to trade freely in council space. The withdrawal of your claims on our colonies. In return, we will recognize the council's authority over its existing members. We will abide by council laws. We will be partners, not subjects." Valthor listened. He thought about the terms, about what they would mean for the council, for the order that had ruled for millennia. He thought about the representatives who would fight this, who would rather go to war than admit they had been wrong. He thought about the species that would see this as weakness, that would challenge the council's authority if they saw it bend. He looked at the indomitable on his screen. He looked at the weapons that could end his fleet, the hull that could not be pierced, the engines that burned like a star. He looked at the woman who had not blinked once during this entire standoff, who had waited, patient, confident, knowing that time was on her side. He understood now. Humanity was not a species that could be bullied. They were not a species that would kneel. They were a species that had learned, through centuries of war, through generations of struggle, that the only way to be respected was to be strong. That the only way to be safe was to be dangerous. That the only way to be heard was to speak in a voice that could not be ignored. He closed the channel. He sat in his office, the reports spread before him, the image of the indomitable on his screen. He did not know what he would do. He did not know if the council would accept these terms, if they would admit their mistake, if they would bow to a species they had dismissed. He only knew that the galaxy had changed. The order he had believed in was crumbling. And in its place, something new was rising. Something that had been forged in fire, in blood, in the long struggle of a species that had learned to fight for everything it had. Something that would not be denied. Something that was waiting for an answer. The negotiations began in the shadow of the indomitable. The council sent its best diplomats, beings who had negotiated treaties that spanned centuries, who had shaped the destiny of 1,000 worlds. They came with soft words and careful smiles, with offers and counter-offers, with centuries of experience in the art of taking without giving. They came expecting to negotiate. They came expecting to win. Humanity sent Admiral Chen. She did not wear a diplomat's robes. She wore her uniform, dark and crisp, her medals pinned to her chest, her scars visible on her hands and face. She did not smile. She did not threaten. She sat at the table across from the council's finest, her hands folded before her eyes cold and steady. She spoke, and when she spoke, the diplomats listened. "Humanity will have a full seat on the council," she said. "Equal representation. Equal voice. Equal vote. Humanity will have the right to trade freely in council space, without restrictions, without oversight. Humanity will keep its colonies. All of them. These are not negotiable." The diplomats pushed back. They offered a lower seat, an observer position, a voice without a vote. Chen refused. They offered trade concessions, limited access, restricted lanes. Chen refused. They offered compromises, deals, arrangements that would let the council save face while giving humanity most of what it wanted. Chen refused. She did not raise her voice. She did not make demands. She simply stated the terms again, as if the council had not spoken. One of the diplomats, an old being from a species that had ruled the council for generations, leaned forward. "You are asking us to give up everything. Our authority, our control, our respect. What do we get in return?" Chen looked at him. "You get peace. You get a partner, not a subject. You get a species that will fight beside you instead of against you. You get a galaxy that is not torn apart by war. That is what we offer. That is what we have always offered. You are the ones who demanded submission. We are offering partnership. The choice is yours." The diplomat sat back. The others looked at each other, their faces uncertain, their confidence shaken. They had come to negotiate. They had come to take. They had not come to face someone who would not bend. One of them threatened to walk away. He stood, his voice loud, his arms spread. If you will not negotiate, then there is nothing to discuss. We will not be bullied by a species that crawled out of the mud 1,000 years ago. We will not. Chen stood. The diplomat fell silent. She looked at him, her eyes cold, her face hard. Then walk, she said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried across the chamber. Walk away. Go back to your council and tell them that you could not make a deal. Go back to your fleets and prepare for war. But understand this. If you walk away, the next ship we send will not be a peace envoy. It will be a declaration. We do not want war. We have never wanted war. But we will not be bullied. We will not be threatened. We will not be dismissed. The choice is yours. She sat down. The diplomat stood for a moment, his face red, his hands shaking. Then he sat down. He did not walk away. The council debated for days. Behind closed doors, in secret sessions, in chambers that had not been used for centuries, they argued. The military advisors told them they could not win a war. The economists told them they could not afford the trade disruption. The diplomats told them that if they refused, they would lose more than a seat at the table. They would lose the respect of every species in the galaxy. They would lose their power, their authority, their place in the order of things. The indomitable waited. Its weapons were silent. Its crew was patient. But its presence was a constant reminder of what humanity was capable of. A constant reminder that the Council had made a mistake. A constant reminder that the galaxy had changed. Valthor made the decision. He stood before the Council chamber, before the representatives of 1,000 worlds, and he announced that humanity would be granted a full seat on the Council. He announced that the disputed territories would be recognized as human colonies. He announced that human trade vessels would have free passage through Council space. He spoke the words, and the chamber was silent. No one cheered. No one protested. They simply listened. They understood. He looked at Admiral Chen, standing across the chamber, her uniform crisp, her medals gleaming, her eyes steady. You came to us with a message of steel, he said. We have heard it. We will remember it. But I hope, for the sake of both our peoples, that we can learn to speak in words, not weapons. Admiral Chen nodded. Her face did not change, but something in her eyes softened. So do we, she said. But we wanted you to understand that we are not a species to be dismissed. We are not a species to be threatened. We are a species that has learned, through centuries of war, that peace is only possible when both sides are strong enough to respect each other. We are here to be partners. But we are here to be equals. And we will accept nothing less. She turned and walked out of the chamber. Behind her, the representatives watched, silent, their faces unreadable. They had come to see the humans submit. They had seen something else. They had seen the future. And they were not sure they were ready for it. But they knew it was coming. They knew they could not stop it. They knew the galaxy had changed. And somewhere in the darkness above, the indomitable waited, its engines burning, its weapons silent, its message delivered. The Council had demanded a peace envoy. Humanity had delivered a message of steel. And now, for the first time in their long history, the Council would have to learn to listen. The Indomitable left Council space a week after the treaty was signed. Its departure was watched by 1,000 worlds, by representatives who would never forget the sight of that dark hull, those gleaming weapons, that woman who had not blinked once during the entire standoff. The ship turned, its engines burning bright, and disappeared into FTL. Behind it, it left a Council that was forever changed. A galaxy that would never be the same. The ship returned to Earth to a hero's welcome. Crowds lined the streets of every city, flags waved, voices raised in celebration. Humanity had done what no one thought possible. It had faced the might of the Galactic Council and had not bent. It had demanded respect and had been given it. It had taken its place among the stars, not as a servant, not as a subject, but as an equal. The Indomitable was more than a ship. It was a symbol, a promise, a warning. The years that followed were not easy. There were conflicts, disagreements, moments when the Council and humanity clashed over trade, over territory, over the old resentments that would not fade. But there was no war. There was no submission. There was, for the first time in the galaxy's long history, a balance. Humanity had a seat at the table. Humanity had a voice in the Council chambers. and humanity had proven that it would never again be silenced. Admiral Chen retired from the military, but she did not disappear. She was too important for that. She became humanity's first council representative, the woman who had delivered the message of steel, the woman who had forced the galaxy to see humanity as something more than a junior species. She served for decades, her voice calm, her eyes steady, her presence a reminder of the day everything changed. She watched as human colonies flourished across the galaxy, as human trade networks expanded, as human voices became a permanent part of the Council's debates. She watched as the species that had once dismissed humanity learned to respect it. She did not gloat. She did not celebrate. She simply did her work, as she had always done. On her last day in office, she stood before the Council one final time. The chamber was full. Representatives from 100 species had come to hear her speak. They had come to hear the woman who had faced them with a warship and walked away with a treaty. They had come to hear the end of an era. She stood at the podium, her uniform replaced by simple clothes, her medals put away, her hair now gray. But her eyes were the same. Cold, steady, unblinking. She told them about the ultimatum, the demand for submission, the moment she decided that humanity would never bow. She told them about the indomitable, the ship that had been built not for war, but for peace. The peace that came from strength, from respect, from the knowledge that neither side could dominate the other. She told them about the message she had carried, the message of steel, and what it had meant. Not a threat, a promise. A promise that humanity would never be dismissed. A promise that humanity would never be silenced. A promise that humanity would always fight for what was theirs. She looked at the representatives, at the species that had once thought they could dictate terms to humanity. Her voice was steady. "We did not come to you as supplicants," she said. "We came to you as equals. We came with a message that was written not in words, but in steel." That message was not a threat. It was a promise. A promise that we would never be dismissed. A promise that we would never be silenced. A promise that we would always fight for what is ours. She paused. The chamber was silent. The galaxy is a dangerous place. There will always be those who seek to dominate, to control, to take what is not theirs. But humanity has learned that the only way to survive is to be strong enough to defend what we have built. We are not conquerors. We are not warriors. We are a species that has learned, through centuries of pain, that peace is only possible when both sides are willing to fight for it. She stepped down from the podium. She walked out of the council chamber. She did not look back. Behind her, the representatives sat in silence, watching her go. They would remember this day. They would remember her. They would remember the woman who had delivered a message of steel and changed the galaxy forever. In the years that followed, the story of the indomitable became legend. It was told in schools, in council chambers, in the stories that parents told their children. The ship that had faced the might of the galaxy and had not blinked. The woman who had refused to kneel. The message that had been written not in words, but in steel. It was a story that reminded everyone who heard it that humanity was not a species to be dismissed. That humanity would not be bullied. That humanity would always answer a demand for submission with something that could not be ignored. And somewhere in the darkness between stars, the UNS Indomitable waited. Its engines were cold. Its weapons were silent. Its crew was at rest. But it waited. Not for war. Not for conquest. For the next time the galaxy needed to be reminded. For the next time someone forgot what the message of steel meant. For the next time humanity had to speak. It would be ready. It would always be ready. And when it came, the galaxy would remember. They would never forget.